Sure this is working. All right, we are on. All right, hello everybody. We are back after a couple of weeks off. Goddess Bible Study at Dodge here, and we've got in the house tonight. We have got Rosalie is back after some time off. I believe she was traveling South America. Lisa is back, and so is Joshua Vanderplatz. Thank you guys so much for showing up. This is this is gonna be a pretty open topic tonight because there's not a whole lot of material. Like I don't have a long-winded story to read, so we can keep it pretty open tonight. Does anyone want to say hi before I jump into my stuff?
Hello.
Hello.
All right. So tonight we're going to talk about Egypt, the Eye of Ra, and the origins of the triple goddess. Now, the reason why we're doing this is we've departed from the Bible for a few weeks to address some materials that are relevant to the Bible story. They're relevant to the Israelite history. The Israelites obviously came from Egypt when they were in slavery, and then they had the Exodus, which will be where we return to the Bible. And so, last week we were talking about Mesopotamia and Ishtar for a couple of weeks, and we were going to talk about Canaanite mythology next week. So we got a couple of weeks here before we get back to the Bible. But this is a particularly important discussion because I argue that the triple goddess is in the Bible, although only two of the goddesses are named. And that this is central. Oh, Tony's here with us. I'm going to bring Tony in. Hello, Tony.
Hello.
So we got a pretty full house here. So we're just getting started. So yeah, I think that the triple goddess is in the Bible, and it's central when the Israelites transition from paganism to monotheism. Getting rid of Asherah, Astarte, and Anat, who is the Israelite goddesses, is central to the entire project, the theological project of monotheism, central to what the Hebrew prophets and biblical writers are trying to accomplish. And so this motif repeats across cultures, and it's still around today in India. The names change, but the metaphysics remains the same. And I think that this has been overlooked by the academics and the scholars. And is not being treated by the scholars at all right now. But I think it's important. And we were just discussing offline, like intentions and my intentions with all this. And I want to state very clearly for everybody that, and I wrote this down, is that my intention with all this is to make this argument about the triple goddess, that it's cross-cultural, that it describes the feminine divine, the mother of the biblical God, if you will, for lack of better language. But then I just want to give it away, that I want to treat this like open source software, and I'm not trying to market myself. I'm not trying to market a product. I'm not planning on writing any more books. I have nothing to sell. I have no authority. I just want to give this away like open source software code and let hopefully somebody else will pick up on it and want to run with it. I have my stash of material that I want to present. But beyond that, I'm really just trying to give it away. And I hope other people will pick up on it. I'm not a marketer, and I'm terrible at promotions or self-promotion. I don't even want to. I don't want to be the center of attention. It's not about me, but I do want to get this information out there. So that's my intention with all this. So as we go through, we've talked about Mesopotamia. We'll obviously talk about Israel in the Old Testament. We're going to talk about Jesus in the New Testament, that this stuff plays directly in with Jesus. I believe Jesus is raised by the mother, that the three Marys in the New Testament is a directly part of this symbolic motif. We see it in Greece and Rome. We see it in the Quran, and the satanic verses in the Quran are naming Alat, Uzzah, and Manat. It's the same goddesses. And they were central to what Muhammad was doing when he created Islam. That this was a big theological problem for Muhammad personally. And that it's still around today in India in the form of Parvati, Durga, and Kali. And that the Hindus and the Muslims have been fighting for 1,000 years, and they've been fighting. This has been a very heated theological dispute for a long time. That's still a very heated dispute in contemporary India. So I think the triple goddess, I describe it as a code. I'm open to better language. At least was a bit critical of that. I'm open to better terminology, but I think it's a code told in art and stories rather than math and words, and that it's every bit as descriptive of the cosmos as the Pythagorean theorem or pi or the golden ratio or any other, math formulation. Um, I think that's why it gets continued to be picked up and repeated in culture after culture. And so it's three goddesses and one super goddess, and it's actually all the goddesses in one super goddess. Um, but these three ones are particularly important because they describe the cycle of life, and so the mother is like the mother of the cosmos, mother of the universe, mother of us all, who nourishes us, wishes us joy and prosperity, and wants everything good for us. And then the maiden, she is the essence of desire, the essence of life, beauty, expression, joy, sexuality, and so much more. These are just very quick, shorthanded descriptions. There's much more to be said. Um, but the maiden, is everything we want or want to be. And then the death goddess, that the third of the three of the triad, she's the most powerful one of all, and that's why the biblical writers don't name her, because she's the most powerful force in the cosmos. Even calling her death isn't really even adequate, because it's like, what is it that when the universe, falls in on itself and the Big Bang is repeated and everything that has ever been created is subsumed and destroyed and recreated again? What do you call that? I mean, the Hindus call it Kali, who I've got behind me on the wall, but these symbols carry with them incredible depth and wealth of meaning and nuance, and there's so much to be said about any one of them that we could talk for hours and hours and hours about any one of these contexts. Um, so so yeah, the Old Testament is telling the story of the divorce. You get rid of her because it's a divorce. To arrive at monotheism, it's all Father and no mother. As a kid in church, I was like, why is it Father, Son, Holy Ghost and no mother? Where's the mother? Well, I've come to learn as an adult because they got rid of the mother very actively and with violence and with force and it was very intentional. And that's why I think she's coming back, because it's a return to historical norms for the mother goddess to come back, for the divine feminine to return. And I do think she's coming back. You see it all over contemporary society. She never went away. Um, so in Goddess Bible Study, in this project here, we are going to demonstrate where, in the Bible story in particular, where this divorce happens, where the symbolism shows up, and how you can see it. And for me, that has been an entirely different way to read the Bible than the way I was taught as a kid in church. And it's really completely reconstructed my entire relationship to the text. Hopefully, we'll do that for other people too. Um, all right. So
Okay.
go ahead. Yeah, say something.
Okay. Well, we started this before we went on the air about one thing is to go over the history text and everything. And the other thing, and whether it's now or later on in the conversation, I just want to introduce it, and it's come up just in this first opening paragraph, is like, what does it actually mean to us? The return of the Divine Mother. What does that mean to us as women? What does that mean to us as men? What does that mean to us as a society? And a couple of notes I wrote, and I saw this when I was doing the pre-reading before the class today. It says, we want to be the maiden. And I just wanted to know, I thought at some point today, and I'll let you decide when, I would love to know what that means to each of us. And again, I'd like to just explore, what does this divorce from the mother, how has that affected us individually and culturally as a society? What does that loss of this divine mother energy that wants us to be happy and good and prosperous, and how do we see the lack of that in society today? And the further we get away from that, what is happening? Can we name that? And what does the return of the Divine Mother mean to us individually here, that those of us who are here this evening, and just in general? And I just think that is a felt sense of what it is that we're learning in this class, I think is really important. Like, because I agree with you, Ed, and I'm in many, many circles, goddess gatherings as a moon dancer and a lifelong devotee of Divine Mother. I would say, my name is Rosalie, and I agree that the Divine Mother is returning. And I don't know that intellectually like you do, and I'm so intrigued by the texts that support this. I know it in my body and my mind, my heart, and my soul. So that's what I'd like to talk about at some point tonight.
Yeah, that's great. We can talk about it right now. I don't have a lot of material prepared. You want me to just whip right through it and then we can.
Sure. Yes, please. Yeah, let's do that.
Oh, somebody else has joined us here. Oh, it's Michael Arthur. All right. Hi, Michael. I think this is a full house. I think 6 is all I can have. So, Michael, great for you to join us. Thanks for being here.
Yay.
So we got a full house here. All right. So this won't take long to get through this. The triple goddess is a specific symbolic motif whose origins appear to be in Egypt, could be older, but that's the first place we see it in our archaeological material, where she was called the Eye of Ra. And these are among the oldest stories in Egypt, going back to the invention of writing. And so this shows up in the pyramid texts in 2400 BC, thereabouts. They're written in hieroglyphics on the walls of some of the pyramids that predate the Gaza Plateau pyramid. It's not the Gaza pyramids. It's some older ones. And those have some of the oldest, obviously the oldest stories in Egypt. And in those stories, Ra, who actually has many different names. I use Ra as a shorthand, but sometimes he's called Autumn. Sometimes he's got a couple other names. Is there somebody else here? All right. That's Michael still.
Yep.
And so Ra is he's the supreme creator of the Egyptian universe. He's like God of the Bible, El Elyon, God Most High, or Allah for the Muslims. I mean, Ra is the original source creator, and there's a lot of different versions of these stories, so there's not any one authoritative version. So there's a whole bunch of different variants on how Ra came about and the different names that are being used. The way I understand it, the way I'm going to present it, is that he's born from there's these chaotic waters that are sort of timeless and eternal, and that some stories have a name and sometimes are not, but they are typically called a goddess, and and Ra is born out of those, whether he self-actualizes or is born of a mother. I mean, I think there's different ways to describe it. But the point is that he comes along and he creates everything else. So he creates the land, and he creates wind and rain, or wind and moisture, which are called Shu and Tefnut, which are like the original very first primordial gods. And then again, there's different versions of the story, but Shu and Tefnut run off to be by themselves, as lovers, and they get lost. And Ra has only one eye, and Ra is I'm not even sure it's fair to call him male. He's kind of beyond gender. He's kind of he's just, I'm lacking the terminology here, but he's primordial. I mean, he's typically described as male, but he could kind of be beyond sex. Do you have something to say there, Lisa, on that?
I was going to say the word primordial, but you retrieved it.
All right. So anyway, the story goes that Shu and Tefnut, the wind and rain, have gotten lost. And so Ra takes his eye, and again, there's a few different versions of the story, and he sends out his eye to go find them and bring them back. And that eye is, the first version he makes is Sekhmet, who is this fierce lion-headed goddess, who will ultimately become like Kali, this figure of supreme destruction. But she's the first of these. There'll be many goddesses called the Eye of Ra, because before she returns, Ra has already replaced his eye with another eye, and then he returns and makes a bunch of different goddesses. And I guess that makes Sekhmet mad. She doesn't like to see another goddess there. So the other goddesses that get created are Hathor and Bastet, Hathor being the mother goddess, who's very, very popular in Egypt. Hathor and Isis were the two main mother goddesses in Egypt. And we're going to talk about Isis another day. She's not for tonight's discussion. She's a very important topic unto herself. So we'll table Isis. Hathor becomes, the mother goddess, and Bastet is like the maiden. These motifs develop over time, and these characters develop over time. And this is the earliest one. It's not, I don't think, as well fleshed out as you get in later eras. But they're feline. So Bastet shows up as a cat, and they're associated with cats, and Sekhmet is a lion, and then Hathor will manifest as either one. It's really three goddesses and one goddess, same as it is for the Hindus with Parvati, Durga, and Kali. They're all just manifestations of the same goddess. So anyway, yeah.
And I do want to say that Hathor is actually ultimately associated with a cow or a sow,
Right.
as this like very fertile sort of animal, right? And so you'll often see her as the cow-headed deity,
Yeah, right.
and she's usually got horns,
Yep.
and often the solar disk is there, but several of them will kind of take turns having the solar disk on her head. And that's why she's the mother, is because of the fertility, the fecundity, the milk production, that sort of thing.
Right.
And in that way too, of course, she's so much like Hindus with their worship of, like cows and milk, and the importance of all of that.
Yeah, the cow stuff is a very important motif. We could do an entire topic on that. I don't think we will, but that goes back to the Neolithic. Sacred cow worship is like deeply, profoundly old. It goes back to some of the oldest stuff we've got 10,000 years ago, and it's a tradition that lives on not just in India but in Africa. There's a lot of cow worshiping stuff. And then you see the golden calf in the Bible, which again, part of what they're getting rid of. They eliminate the golden calf in the Bible precisely because it's part of these pagan fertility, nature-based traditions, and the biblical traditions that's the opposition. And so that's why they hate on the golden calf in the Bible, the exact reasons that they like the calf in Egypt, right? It's the rival traditions.
It's something else that's kind of interesting about that is if you are familiar with Rudolf Steiner's work of biodynamics and regenerating like land and agriculture. It's an approach to agriculture. It is wholly centered on cows. And it's very kind of woo-woo, but it's also got like this amazing benefits and science to it. But like, I don't know how much he might have drawn from these more ancient traditions and understandings, but I just think it's so fascinating how many places it comes up, right?
Well, I am a big believer in all the regenerative agriculture and grass-fed beef, and that cows are going to be part of the solution for restoring. As I said before off camera, I come at this as an environmentalist, and the regenerative agriculture is central to my entire conception of restoring ecological health. And yes, the cow is I hadn't actually put that together, Lisa. That my own interest in the grass-fed beef ties directly back to the cow symbolism.
Wow.
But of course, you're right. Of course,
it's so powerful. I know we could just go off on that for a while.
Well, I think it's an important thing just to keep in mind, like we talked in past podcasts, is regarding the astrological ages. Remember, Taurus is the bull, and Taurus preceded, Aries. What comes after Aries is Pisces, and now we're entering into Aquarius. So this is also speaking to an ancient past where the bull may have been venerated because of the astrological time that they were living in, where the goddess was worshipped. And also recall, like in the zodiac, every other sign is considered male, female, all the way around the 12 zodiacal signs. So it would have been a more feminine astrological age.
All right. So we've only got one story here, and it's a quick one. Again, there's a lot of different versions of the story. It was actually very central to very important festivals in ancient Egypt. So kind of like the various stories of Jesus, you get different versions of these stories depending on cultural context. But the quick version is that all right. So Ra was upset because he was not being properly worshipped by humans, by the people. They'd forgotten about him. They'd become immoral and inattentive in their sacred duties. And so he decides he's going to send out Sekhmet, his most powerful daughter, to destroy all of humanity, which she is more than happy to do because it's like she's a dog who's finally been let off her leash and she gets to go run wild. And so she starts to just, tear up everybody, and there's rivers of blood. And Ra comes to regret it. He says, "Oh my God, oh my me, she's going to destroy everything." And she can't be stopped because, she's just enjoying herself too much, and she's more powerful than all the other gods. And so all the other gods are afraid of her, and they fear the destruction of the entire universe. And so since they can't stop her, their only hope is to try and placate her or to trick her. And so what they do is, she's bathed in blood and she's drinking blood and all that stuff. And so they brew up a special batch of beer, which they dye red, and they trick Sekhmet into drinking it, which of course she does. And so she gets drunk and kind of like passes out or whatever. And she relaxes and turns back into Hathor, the loving mother goddess, and disaster is averted. And so this in turn becomes a very important annual festival, beer festival in Egypt, that culminates in a big party and like all these festivities. And I read some different, it was a very female centric festival as well. Like the women were running it. And so there's a lot of sexuality, I guess, in it. I didn't write it up because I didn't have enough details to present it in a way I felt was accurate, but apparently it was a very big, important annual festival every year. And if anyone, at least if you know more about it, please.
So part of it really was it was sort of a bacchanalia. It was all about like everybody drinking and getting drunk. Like it was free to all, and people would just hand out and share all the beer, the alcohol, the libations. And people would get drunk and they would have sex. And so there was like a fertility aspect to that. But it's really just meant mostly to be very joyful and celebratory, just for the sake of doing all of those things. So very, very much like a bacchanalia.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so I want to. The reason why I want to focus on Sekhmet in particular and Kali is because she's the easiest symbol to pull out of the stack and say is cross-cultural, because a mother goddess is frankly a little too generic, I think, to make a strong argument about, because like you could have a lot of different reasons for a mother goddess, and for the maiden too, a lot of different versions of this. But this death goddess, and again, if someone has a better language than death, I'm all for it. I don't think crone is the right word when you're talking about the goddesses. I think crone is fine for a human, but I don't know that crone is a good description for Kali or Sekhmet.
In the sort of more modern context, we say either the dark goddess or we say like destruction goddesses. Yeah.
So the goddess of destruction, and she does not, and this goddess does not appear in every culture. The Greeks and Romans don't have her. They have a triple goddess, but they have Hecate instead of Kali, and Hecate is a lot more genteel. She she's a goddess of nighttime and witchcraft and magic, and she's a shoot, what's the name of it when you?
She's a psychopomp and a necromancer.
Yes, she takes you into the underworld. So she's a psychopomp, so she's very important, but she's not this cosmic destruction, more powerful than God kind of character. Because the Greeks are doing the same thing as the Hebrews. They're demoting all the goddesses, so they're all submissive to Zeus. So Zeus will be the ultimate power in the Greek pantheon, and a character like Sekhmet or Anat or Kali is more powerful than Zeus and would destroy everything Zeus does. And so they don't want to have that kind of character around. And that's exactly what makes this character so powerful, and so powerful in terms of biblical theology, because she's more powerful than Yahweh. She's more powerful than El. Whatever God of the Bible creates, this goddess has the power to destroy. And that makes her the ultimate force in the cosmos and undermines the entire theology of monotheism. Because in monotheism, God is the most important. God is unstoppable. But if you've got this other character who can match him or defeat him, that undermines the entire thing of monotheism.
So I think it's worth saying that because like the goddess as a whole, or as say like one entity that has many different iterations and expressions, is associated with the earth. And so if we think about like big deal earth occurrences that, you know, we think of as like tragedies or whatever, because it, you know, human lives and, you know, destruction, but we're talking about things like tsunamis and earthquakes and hurricanes and, you know, things of that nature, volcanic eruptions, right? We're talking about acts of destruction that nobody has any control over, right. That, you know, with lots of death. And I mean, that could even be maybe argued that in the Bible with like the different, the blights and so on that occur, you know, fire from the sky, what have you. That is the inherent power in these kinds of goddesses as well. And it might be sort of a metaphor for describing like the things that, you know, the powers of nature and the earth that no one, not even God, has any control over, right? We call it an act of God, but really maybe we should be calling it an act of goddess.
Exactly. No, that's exactly what we should be calling it.
Yeah.
But this is where it gets political, because this would raise hackles in the culture wars, right? And, you know, there's a lot of evangelicals or Muslims that would not appreciate this line of commentary at all. And so to call it an act of goddess is, I think, is very potent. But we'll see if we can get there culturally. A couple last comments on Sekhmet. She was very common. I was actually kind of quite surprised to learn about her, because I feel like we don't get taught about Sekhmet in Western when we talk about Egypt casually. If you're not hardcore into Egypt, I don't think you hear about Sekhmet all that much. She was kind of news to me, frankly. And I learned about it a couple of years ago, but it was news when I learned about her. But there's a lot of statues in Egypt, and there's one in particular of her that there's all these videos on YouTube of this one particular statue of Sekhmet where people are claiming all these crazy mystical experiences, and tourists are going to see it. And there's all this weird video of these, like, it's all very subtle, but like people are making all sorts of weird claims about it. There's one particular statue. And then, is anyone familiar with that?
Well, I have seen some of these statues. That there was a Queens of Egypt, I guess, exhibit at the National Geographic Museum in DC several years ago. And they had some really amazing things there, including several of these Sekhmet statues. So the deal with these statues is that they are very large. I mean, as you almost would kind of expect, considering the pyramids and the Sphinx and everything, very large. And initially, apparently, there was it was like they made so many of them and had them around, almost like this kind of metaphysical army, of all of these sort of like warrior goddesses, or, you know, and expressions of Sekhmet and her power. But to be in the room with some of those things was to walk into a situation where you felt something. It was like they're just, you can't help but be sort of awed by them.
Yeah. So, and then the Vatican has a whole collection of them. I was
Isn't
thinking
that
there's like
interesting?
11 or 13 of them all in one room in the Vatican Museum. I don't know that they've actually been there that long. I think they're kind of a recent collection, but nonetheless, there's this really stunning display in the Vatican of like a whole room full of these Sekhmet statues, which must be kind of intimidating, I guess, if you go in there, or it must be powerful. I can only imagine how it feels to walk in that room.
I
Especially a lot of
I
them.
just I just wonder if it's from, like old wars and things and colonization by the church where they might have gone in and, made away with some stolen artifacts. I mean, I don't know, but that's what comes to my mind.
Well, they probably are stolen, but that goes without saying. Colonial
Yeah.
imperialism, right? Um, um, so yeah, yeah. Hathor is a very interesting goddess. We're going to come back to Hathor later, not tonight, but she specifically about Hathor. She has a lot of things she's associated with, but one thing in particular is beauty, and like in cosmetics. And she has her hair is a symbol. Hathor's hair is a very specific symbol that then gets used on other goddesses, including on Asherah, which we will talk about when we come back to Asherah in the Bible. They show Asherah having Hathor's hair, which I thought was interesting because it's a symbol of beauty. So anyway, yeah, that's yeah. So the different goddesses I've got that have follow this motif explicitly are Hathor, Bastet, Sekhmet in Egypt. In Israel, it's going to be Asherah, Astarte, and Anat. Those are the ones that are named in the Bible. And then in Arabia, the ones that are named in the Quran are Alat, Uzzah, and Manat. So Alat goes with Allah. That's the wife mother of Allah, Alat and Allah. And then Manat has a similar name as Anat. And then in contemporary India, it's Parvati, Durga, and Kali. And those actually arrived in India relatively late. They're not like Vedic goddesses. They're not part of the older pantheons. They definitely go from west to east. So they go from Egypt, and you can trace them through time, and you can see where they arrive in India. And I'm going to hesitate on the dates, but it's in a later set of stories. It's sort of contemporary with the Bible. Anyway, that's all I've got prepared. So we can close this and just open the discussion to whatever anyone wants to say.
Lisa.
Yes.
So
Anything?
Rosalie, we can come back to your comments, Rosalie.
Okay, yeah. So I guess my question to the group is, what is your individual, personal, if any, relationship to Divine Mother, goddess reverence, worship in your practices, in your spiritual practices, or in your relationship with feminine, and I'd love to hear from the men here and from Lisa, and maybe if anyone feels called to talk about that, in any context, what the return of the Divine Mother means, to each of us personally.
I'm going to nominate Tony to say something. You're muted, Tony.
Oh, everybody froze. I don't hear anybody.
Yep.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, wow. I get called out on the opening question. Can't dodge that, can I?
I can't dodge that.
So
Can't dodge.
what is my relationship to Divine Mother? What does that mean to me? That's a deep question. I know I've pondered and played around with it a little bit, but I don't think I've ever had it asked in a way where I've got to answer it so directly. I think this may not be exactly the right answer, but the place that I would like come from is that I think that ultimately, in my mind, it gets to kind of a way of being more than anything, and recognizing that there is a lot to be kind of respected and deferred to in the form of creation, and that the idea of like cultivating and creating things according to the natural cycles of the universe and the earth, and showing more respect to going into the flow of those cycles rather than trying to control them or dominate them. And I think that shows up for me like societally in a more communal and more kind of tribal kind of way of being, where we recognize that feminine energy is really the source of creation, and that we want to be able to respect and protect that. We want to be able to cultivate that for kind of our own good and our own benefit. And by our, I mean everybody that's involved in it. And so a lot of a lot of my personal relationship with this is along the lines of my spiritual journey of surrender. And so surrendering to trying to control things, surrendering to trying to make things the way as I want them to be made, and instead like going with more of the flow and more of the respect of kind of how things happen. And so I think that shows up in just recognizing kind of feminine energy and the relationships that I have with the women in my life, beginning with my daughters and my ex-wife, and then friends and special acquaintances, and even into the work environment, where I think that we've gotten so calculating and so controlling and so accounting and counting in the way that we do things, that we're not really kind of like in the flow of where real creation comes from, and kind of respecting and cultivating kind of the time that it takes for things to happen. And instead we've gotten into this like manufacturing and control kind of concept. So for me personally, it's a lot of just like recognizing a more natural cycle to energy, and letting go and surrendering, and paying a little bit more respect and service and protection. And I mean, tactically, that means a whole different way that I view and relate to women and feminine energy. And I could probably go down a rabbit hole on a couple of different things there, but I'm not sure if I want to go on the record completely publicly with some of those things.
I'd love to respond. Thank you so much for sharing, Tony. That was really so rich and inspiring, and I really, really appreciate it. I happen to love C words like chocolate and community, and you touched on a lot of good C words, cultivation and cycles and community. And then the C words that you were leaving behind, as I heard it, was control and counting, as I see as, transactional. Um, so yeah, circling and community and cycles and reverence. And then you said two words that really stood out that to me is what I, as a woman in reverence to the return of the divine goddess, is you talked about service and protection. And on behalf of goddesses everywhere, I know that that's what I think many of us are looking for from the divine masculine, this idea of what it might be like to be for for masculine energy to be in service and protection of these beautiful virtues which you described so eloquently.
Thank you. I think you probably caught and summarized it better than I thought I was articulating it. And I think something that came up for me there, Rosalie, too, is patience. Patience, instead of trying to push things and rush things, but having patience about how things are going to unfold. And I mean, again, for me, I think it feels very exhausting to try to stand alone or to try to lead against the current. And I think that I would appreciate being taken care of. And so, in the act of surrender to being cared for, it kind of creates that cycle of service and protection. Like, what is actually my best use of my energy? To be patient, to help create or hold a container that is in service to something more than myself, rather than having to kind of be the one in charge, and be the one in control of things.
You know, and I'll just say, like, patience for us women who have carried a child into this world, that certainly took a lot of patience, and our womb space becomes the container not only for the children we birth, but for what we birth in this world. And the other thing, you were talking about not leading, how exhausting it is to lead. I think another quality of divine feminine is the receiving, is to receive and allow and flow. Those are other virtues that, yeah, I think that's beautiful.
Well, I set the bar high now, so who wants to jump over it?
I'm happy to share. I would like a re-articulation of the question, so I make sure that I'm answering it most accurately.
Okay, Lisa, do you want to take a
Yeah,
stab
may
at the
I?
question?
Yeah. What is your relationship and your felt embodied experience of the goddess or the divine feminine? Do you have practices around that? How does that affect your life?
Okay, so I think that to answer that question, it would be best to articulate my experience before I had an intentional relationship with the goddess or the divine feminine, in the sense that before that, I was raised in a very Judeo-Christian background, which is authoritarian, which is prescriptive, which has rules that you follow. And there is a sense of the sacred and the divine, but it's very much outside of this material plane. So for me, my relationship with the divine feminine was the awakening that the divine is as much, if not more so, within my own being and within the present moment as it is in anything that could ever be conceivably outside of me. So that awakening was to divine immanence, right? Being a primary principle of the feminine. And I believe that it is the province of all beings, right? I mean, regardless of gender, that it's simply the worship or recognition. I think recognition of the feminine principle is something that has been, I would say, surgically extracted from most Western, Christian or Judeo-Christian spiritual practices. So my personal way of recognizing it is through a regular practice of connecting with myself and connecting with my own body, spirit, temple. And another way is through song. I have some particular chants to the divine feminine, which are very special to me. It is also through, I would say, just a character of energy that was not accessible for me before. I would say I had divine feminine initiation that involves a slowness and a listening and an emotiveness that was not present in my being before that, which was entirely ruled by my mind and through the brilliance of my superlative intelligence, right? Like there was a new intelligence that came online for me that is no less powerful, but feels very different and slower. And I would use the word wise, wiser, but it's more like wiser in an embodied sense, like more all feeling versus all knowing. And I wouldn't necessarily tie it to any particular like gendered behavior, just because that can change based on the culture. I do resonate with many of the things that Tony said, but I like to think of it as energy first and bodies second. It's the way that I approach it, because yeah, I mean, there are some things that are inherent in the gendered experience. For example, the purpose of the masculine principle is to provide the safety and containment for the feminine principle, but how that actually plays out from person to person and situation to situation may or may not have anything to do with the gender of the individual involved, or it may. So it's very complex. I hope that answers your question.
That was Michael. I can't see your face.
I know. I've been trying to mess with it. It just won't
That's
work.
okay. That's okay. I want to, one word that came up there of knowing was the gnosis. I think that word encapsulates kind of a felt, experienced knowing. Do we all agree with that? There's like that great
Yeah.
gnosis. So that really, and then the other thing I really picked up on was this idea of slowing down, which, you know, in yoga we know as the yin energy, right? And it's just like the beautiful, like as a yoga teacher, I talk about the magnificent map of any given moment. That becomes exquisite only when we slow down. So I really, really appreciate. I mean, I just think that just even that idea alone of of the energy and possibility of what emerges when we stop chasing, and in that slowing is the allowing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say, I love that both Michael and Tony brought up this idea of like men or masculine energy sort of holding a safe container and providing certain things. And I find that valuable and important. And at the same time, I also find that what a lot of us happen to do is we start falling into this very sort of binary understanding of things that, you know, of course, a mother, for instance, of course, can be incredibly protective and keep things safe and provide, you know. So I think sometimes we get into this very sort of like, you know, and it's so rampant in the spiritual community, it makes me want to barf. That this whole idea that, you know, men and male body people and this like, you know, there's very distinct masculine and very distinct feminine energy. I'm so over all of that. I think there's so much more overlap, and I think it's so much more of an integrated thing. So I just want to be able to say that. Now, and that said, I dedicated my life and my service as a priestess to the goddess now almost 30 years ago. As a practitioner prior to that, and thankfully did not grow up with religion other than what was in, the culture, and a few times at church growing up. Never, ever did any of it make any sense to me. Even as a very young child, I was like, this doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense. I don't get it. So I am a devotee to the goddess. I am her servant and her priestess. And when I found that there was such a thing as the goddess, and I had already been forming a lot of my own understandings that the earth is my mother, these kinds of things. And when I found that, it was like, oh, okay, there we go. I am divine, right? There are other expressions of divinity than this sort of like God the Father, who's very punishing and, sin and all of this stuff. None of that ever made any sense to me. I think my maybe say 3 biggest ways that I connect the most deeply to what I sort of think of as the divine, that, and maybe more on the feminine side, if you will, is absolutely nature and the cycles of the agricultural wheel of the year, where we're honoring the cycles of the sun and the season and the moons, whatever season we're in, wherever the sun happens to be at any given time. And to me, also in this day and age of what's real and what's not, like everything's fake and it's AI and it's misinformation and everything, I walk outside my door and I know what's true and real. That is what's true and real. There's no disputing it. If you're ever lost in your life and you're not sure where you're at or what to do, look outside, go outside. First off, you'll get more centered in yourself. You'll feel calmer. You'll feel more present. But also, you're like, nature tells you at any given time and demonstrates this is what's going on right now. This is what we're up to. And that's all you ever really need to know. And if that's the one thing you chose to learn and follow in your life, then you're going to be working in conjunction with the cycles, in union, in concert with those things. And that's where the flow comes in. As Tony was saying, that's where the flow is. It's also how we tap back into that more sort of primal and primordial sort of knowing or gnosis, as Michael was saying, because like animals, we have those instincts within us. Like we might be able to just be like, I know somehow it's going to rain, or maybe it's going to be a bad winter, or whatever those things might be. I know where to find food or water, because we'd be so much more connected to nature and the earth and the cycles that we wouldn't have to rely so much on our thinking as we would just in what we know inside of our bodies to be true. And that access to information is just as valuable, and maybe in some cases more valuable, than the kind of cognitive information that this society has always placed more emphasis on. I'd say one of the other ways that I really connect to that energy is just through my own body and my pleasure and my experience of being a woman on this earth and having, female and woman-bodied oriented experiences. And so that's also very interesting. And even though sometimes it's a real challenge, I would not want it any other way. I really love and appreciate that about myself, and that I get to be like the embodiment of that. To me, we're all the embodiment of different expressions of the divine. And I think that's so much of what Yeshua was trying to teach. And so I think maybe my third thing might be just being in service, holding space for people, doing ritual. I am a ritual artist. I'm a priestess. I'm conducting sacred ceremonies, whether it's by myself or with a small group, or whether it's for a death or a marriage or a rite of passage, or also in a group of hundreds of people. And I've seen that within that context of ritual and ceremony, that so much healing and integration takes place. And we're working in union with the elements and nature. We're working in union with the cycles of life, death, and rebirth over and over again. So I'm just, putting a real small, I guess, like perspective on, what I believe, what my practices are, what's important to me. But that's just to give you a teeny little glimpse, because obviously if I've been doing this for over 30 years, but actively in service for very close to 30 years now, it's a big deal. This is how I make, my way on this earth. This is how, this is my vocation. This is what I do. It is my calling. It is my passion. And so that's why I love being able to engage in all of these conversations and Ed's material, because I get to learn even more about these things that are important to me.
So Lisa, you introduced some more C words, ceremony, and communion, and you talked about being in union with nature, so communion. I love the play on words of community and union, and communion with nature and community and ceremony. And then I inferred from that I know you like to use the cauldron of transformation. And the other C word you mentioned was calling. And I think that's a really important one, is hearing the call, reminds me of that great book, Big Magic. And so, I appreciate all of us answering the call to be here in community together this evening. It feels very divinely feminine. I also want to mention, as the mother of a trans adult, and one of my best friends has been a high school counselor for the last 35 years. And she says the number of like non-binary trans people has increased by like 1,000%, both in her school and what she knows. And I think that's part of our evolution, is blurring these lines, like that we're finally realizing that genitals and gender are not supposed to be mutually exclusive. These are just concepts of ways to kind of map out these virtues, so I think this community certainly is evolved enough to know that that gender and genitals certainly are not mutually exclusive. So it's just a map that is really important to me. As far as, my relationship to divine in general, I think Paul Stamets probably helps me understand it the most. The fabulous fungi. His most recent book is called AI, Mycelium, and the Future of Humanity. And just to summarize it, it makes me believe that the World Wide Web is really just a reflection of collective consciousness. It's just possible because we've just tapped in to collective consciousness and now created a mechanism by which we can do that in real time. I'm obsessed with the James Webb Telescope. We're literally, obviously, time traveling all the way back to the Big Bang. And now AI is helping it. We're watching things in real time. Again, I believe all that's possible just because life mimics divine, really. And when we talk about embodiment and primordial and tapping into our embodied knowing, this is where I'm so happy we got here, because the mind tends to hijack that. We all know that. And so what's possible when we really drop into the intelligence of our body? And as an animist, I'm obsessed. The aliens are here amongst us. They are in the Venus flytrap. Uh, um, you know that astrophysicists are studying dragonflies because they intercept their prey. They witness their prey and they accelerate and intercept them. I mean, the calculus that it takes for them to do that still has stunned astrophysicists, which I just get such a giggle about. You know, the intelligent life is right here, hiding in plain sight. It's within us and around us. So yeah. Hmm.
Well, Ed, I think the discussion on the triple goddess is really a discussion about these cycles of life, right? I mean, like, there's just so many ways that you can articulate what those cycles are, you know, life, death, rebirth, or whatever, you know, potential fruition, and maybe like decay or decline or entropy. I mean, there's just so many ways to express that. But I'll tell you, in more modern thinking with regards to these expressions of the goddess, we are claiming a fourth season, which kind of actually makes sense when you think about nature and how the four seasons work, right? That there's something between mother and like death or crone or whatever you want to call it. And some people are claiming that as like the sovereign or the queen. Some are claiming that as maybe like the wise one or like the medicine woman or that sort of thing, the teacher, priestess person. And that feels very true as far as like, you know, like women's bodies. And even sometimes too, when you look at some of these goddesses, because not very many of them, and a lot of them aren't even like mothers necessarily,
Sure.
right? They sort of straddle. So I just thought it'd be interesting to also just, you know, mention that, since that's part of what seems to be happening, like as things evolve and as we understand and as we observe like nature and the cycles and everything, that there's like more there. And you know that there's also an equivalent for men, for the masculine as well. So it's essentially, I think, what warrior, father, or like householder, maybe if you're in India, like a householder, and then it would be like sage. So those would be the three sort of like male equivalents. But there again, there's room for more expression, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, another motif that had four goddesses would be interesting. I don't think we see it historically, although I'm open to somebody pointing it out. But yeah, that's the thing about all these motifs, is that they're fluid, and we don't have to stick. We're not obligated to stick to any particular names or any particular formulations. If it works, it works. And if you arrive, I'm a big believer that however you arrive at the right answer, it's still the right answer. If it's a wild guess, if you did it by careful analysis or pure instinct or just a wild guess, if you get the right answer, you get the right answer. And doesn't really matter how you arrive at it. And Rosalie, you mentioned before about like intuition and sort of knowing in your body rather than knowing intellectually. I mean, this is a lot of how I arrived at this stuff, is via intuition. Then I go look it up, like follow my intuitions and then run it down. And then I see, oh, then I can put the connections together, which is not the way the academics are doing it, which is why they don't like my work, because they follow very linear paths, especially the written word. And and it's all going to have these very linear mechanistic connections. And you're not allowed to just be like, oh, I just found the answer. They don't accept that. You have to show the causal mechanism. Otherwise, it gets rejected in peer review, and it won't be accepted as proper knowledge. But I totally reject that. I rejected that as an undergrad even. I'm like, I'm getting the answer even though I'm not doing it your way, and I'm still getting the right answer. So I think there's a lot of different ways to approach this stuff. And I think take it back to myself, my own relationship with the mother, like, to me, it's definitely about nature, and it comes from nature and being in nature, and then stumbling into the stuff in the Bible and just wanting to figure it out. But I think that we need ecological wisdom. Like, we are at this breaking point. We're at this transformative moment in global history, like global civilization, where if we don't get our act together ecologically, the mother's going to show us who's boss, and we're at this moment where we need ecological wisdom, and we need to learn the circular ways of thinking, and we need to learn how to model nature. I work in technology. I've spent my entire career building high-tech stuff that ends up in a landfill. So it's been bothering me for a long time that every new computer, I don't do IT work anymore, but I used to. Every new computer I unboxed every day was like Christmas. I'm unboxing new computers and giving them to somebody. But in my mind, I knew that these computers have a short life and are going to end up in a landfill. And it always really bothered me. So it's like, how do we bring ecological wisdom to the computer trades or to the, aluminum smelting or making cars? Like, we need ecological wisdom across our entire culture, and that becomes political, and that, it's another conversation. But I think that that's what's happening, is that I do believe the 21st century is a battlefield of religion in a spiritual battlefield, and that the goddess is like the sword and the stone that is just waiting to be pulled out. As liberalism burns down around us, like, this is the next step. Like, this is clearly got to be the next phase of humanity is to bring the goddess back, because it's a return to historical norms, and it's never made sense that she was taken away. It's always been violence and manipulation and abuse. She was kept away through abuse. And the other part of it is realizing that, the mother is the material world. God is transcendent. He's consciousness. You can't touch God, but the mother is the totality of the material world. And so when you realize that, you realize the entire material world is also sacred. In the Christian context, I was always taught the material world is fallen. The material world is sinful. And if you want to get with God, you've got to escape the bounds of the material world and focus on transcendent meditation or whatever, and prayer and all this stuff. In the afterlife, they were always like, not this world, everything but this world. But the mother is this world. And that's what's so fabulous about putting the mother back on her pedestal, is realizing we need to make our world sacred too, and make our civilization sacred, because in our material built space, our suburban environments in Fairfax County, Virginia, needs to become a sacred space. It is not a sacred space today. Fairfax County, Virginia, if you've ever been there, is that's where I grew up. That's why it comes to mind.
That's where I'm from.
It's very not sacred. It's not a sacred space. It's very alienating, I found as a child. And so how do we turn the suburbs, these plastic, materialist, capitalist suburbs, into a sacred living space of the mother? I think that's really, really what I want to see. Tony and I talked about, we have like this sort of men's thing going. Tony works with men in his coaching, and we talk about being warriors for Goddess. And like, that's a theme I want to build on with some of the other men, and hear what the ladies have to say about it too. But warriors for Goddess is like the man's sacred role in all of this. Joshua, you've been very quiet. Do you have anything to add in before? Because we're going to wrap up too long.
I want to hear from Joshua for sure, but I want to say that I think it's worth mentioning, Ed, that you came to all of this through plant medicine, right? Through this sacred herb, right? Mary Jane, right? Like, this plant, this, that has its own sort of like spirit and everything, like, led you to all of this.
100%. Plant medicine was my teacher. I didn't learn it in school.
Right.
I was following the threads of cannabis history. That's how I learned that was my first introduction to all this, was cannabis history, and then it became goddess history.
I know, like when they had reefer madness back in the day, this is exactly what they were talking about.
Totally, absolutely.
Josh, talk to us, man.
Well, I completely agree with the whole plant medicine element to all this. And I don't think it's any accident that we're starting to see the rise of these ideas around the mother as things like ayahuasca and ceremonial use of plants, not just recreational use, becomes more culturally understood. Like, to the question that all the men have been asked this evening, I've been pondering how to even know how to contribute to this, because I think I've come to the mother in both an intellectual way as well as like experientially, both through the plant medicines, but also through meditations and stillness of the body, and getting very still in the body to the point of death, which is what I think the goddess often represents. If God is life, the goddess is death, and for whatever reason we bifurcate these things as if death is not sacred. Death is as sacred as life, and without death we can't have life. Without death we can't appreciate life. And there is this yin and this yang that is so important in spiritual teachings, that when we separate one, we fall into this real deep imbalance, culturally speaking and spiritually speaking. And so when I was a Greek Orthodox priest and studying through Christianity, the Virgin was was something that stood out to me. And it wasn't until I left the priesthood and left Christianity that I realized that she was this we were talking about a container, right? In my theological trainings, Mary became the container. We were talking about a container earlier. The earth is a container for us to experience the spiritual life this life that we live in. The feminine is very much the container. And even the astrological teachings that I've immersed myself in post priesthood earth and water is the feminine, air and fire is the masculine, and you can't contain air or fire. You can't have fire unless you have these containers, or unless there's this play going on, again, this yin and yang. And as I've tried to go deeper into these things that I've studied all these years of my life, and try to make sense of all of them, probably one of the most profound things that I ever came across was in some Hellenistic teachings, astrological teachings that I wasn't expecting, that have to do with the god and goddess. I mean, the god and goddess are absolutely enshrined in the Hellenistic zodiacal wheel that we can all learn from in the stars. The stars are speaking to us. They're teaching us through patterns, through light. And when I found out that the third house in the zodiacal wheel from the ascendant is called goddess, it really shocked me to my core. The ninth house of the zodiacal wheel is called God. And when I went deeper into this and I tried to understand what is the beginnings or the roots of why these teachings would be there, and I realized that the third house has to speak about the early morning hours, very early, pre-dawn, and the idea of getting up early in the morning and getting very still as if you're dead, in these ancient rituals of the Greeks practiced what was called incubation, and bringing those practices of stillness and entering into death in the early morning hours. I feel like I came into visceral contact, not just with ideas of the goddess, but literally with her presence, not just within my body, but in all the material substance around me, whether it's in my carpet or in my walls in the glass panes of my windows, literally the material universe began to have a kind of intelligence speaking to me.
Mm.
And it was only in the stillness of the morning,
Mm.
in those very early morning hours, which is called goddess in these early hours. And this speaks to seasons too. The third house doesn't just have to do with the time of day. It's also the third house from Cancer is Virgo, which is the Virgin, which speaks of fall. We're dying here in this autumn season. Things are the autumn. We're starting to go into the tomb, into the fall, and we're dying. There's something about entering into death where we enter into the goddess, and only in her can we almost be reborn. So these kinds of things, both intellectually and like just the spiritual practices that I somehow fell upon through time and just reading and what have you. And I mentioned Peter Kingsley early on in practicing these incubation practices. The goddess is as real as our physical flesh. And the moment we begin to see that the material world is uncreated and not created, I think this is one of the biggest lies. And if this is something I want to, and I think I've discussed this with Ed, at some point in the future, after the presentations that he's presenting, is to get into some of the theological underpinnings, that this idea that the material world is created, this is a very subtle doctrinal notion. But if we believe that all material nature is created, it makes the goddess created and subjugated to the uncreated. However, what if, and this is like my main thing, what if the material world is uncreated? And it's with the divine masculine and the divine feminine, when they came together, they created form together. And that's what creation is. But the substance of the material has always been uncreated. The substance of the immaterial, the masculine side of things, is uncreated. But when the two come together, then they form and they create. This is where all form is, and this is what oneness is. But what's actually the biggest lie from my perspective is that not everything is one, everything is two. There is God and goddess. Oneness is created, it's not uncreated. There is not one uncreated source. I think it is a mind disease that we have to be set free from. I think it's a pernicious patriarchal doctrine that we have to examine and truly examine with spiritual freedom to see that this doctrine itself might be the very thing that is keeping us in a psychological prison that we can't get free from, because it's not examined. We don't discuss it. We don't think that there's any possibility that only oneness is the uncreated, rather than there was always two. There was always two. One was created, but two was always uncreated, and has always been. And there was never a time when she was not. She has always been. She didn't come out of the masculine. She wasn't subjugated to the masculine. She has always been right there, co-eternal and co-uncreated with the masculine.
Yeah, 100% agree. And that's what the Hindus call Shiva Shakti. That's exactly their theology, is that consciousness and matter are coexistent and eternal, neither created nor destroyed.
Yeah.
The form gets destroyed, but the
form gets destroyed.
Source was never created.
Yeah, I agree that like everything is all like one, and from one comes two. Like if the way things are in some way, like say organized in this third dimensional time space continuum is by math and geometry, right? So you necessarily, if you have one, you necessarily must have two, because you can't have up without down, or left without right, or masculine without feminine, or light without dark. You can't not. It's right. That's how things are organized. That's just period, right? And I tend to be more of an animist. I call myself an animist more than anything, but I do place emphasis on these more feminine principles, because to me, they are the tangible principles and the things that I can directly engage with, and the things that bring me the most like succor, if you will, in my life. But I appreciate you bringing that up. And I also want to say that she isn't just death, right? She is life. She is birth. She nurtures life. So she just plays out the cycle, the entire cycle. And, so it's like with that cycle, in a way, like where does that masculine principle of divinity kind of come into play if she's like, giving, like birthing life, gestating, and then birthing life, and then nurturing life, and then, and then death, like ultimately, where does he come into play with those, with those cycles?
Lisa, I think that these are the kind of conversations, almost doctrinal conversations, I think we're kind of longing to have, to bring some intellectual understanding, not over rationalizing it, but it's so important because when we talk about like the world of the dead, well, when we talk about the world of the dead, those souls are alive, but we still talk about them as dead. So when I speak of the goddess as like death, it's not like I'm negating that she's life. We don't understand what death is. That's really what what I'm trying to get at. Like what we call death and like annihilation, and there is no more, and you just flatlined, and there's no more energy of that. That can't be what that is. Death is something different than how we typically define it.
Well, I will say that these conversations happen all the time in my circles and communities because of the kind of people that I run with, but we're pagans and animists and druids and, that sort of thing. So this is where we like live.
Yeah.
I'd like to interject one idea about the Big Bang Theory. The smallest form of life is the atom, where you have matter and antimatter. And within that, so the even smaller is the neutrino, which is the matter inside the atom. If you guys don't know about the DUNE, which is the deep underground neutrino experiment, I encourage you all to look at it. It's so fabulous. They take the neutrino, which is the matter. I mean, they say that the Big Bang occurred just because there was like slightly more matter than antimatter, which is why we exist at all. This, when you get down to the molecular level, we're talking about, the matters, the existence of matter itself.
Right, but then that's like a whole sort of like fractal, like microcosm, macrocosm sort of thing as well. That there are those patterns.
Exactly. And it had to explode in order for the universe to even come into existence. There was the big explosion. There was a destruction in order for existence to even occur. So again, yes, to destruction and creation and the dance between the two.
It's pretty, I mean, when you think about that kind of destruction that created, right?
Exactly.
Like there's the cycle again, right?
Exactly.
And then that's like destruction goddess that the god has no control over. Like I mean, it's interesting how far back these understandings go. And I think, it's beautiful the way the mythology and the stories were told to try to make sense of it. But I think because our ancient ancestors, if you will, those ancient civilizations were more closely in tune with the cycles of the earth and the sun and the moon and the stars and everything, I think they still had access to that internal gnosis. And that's probably part of why they made these stories so that they could, understand and hand that information down.
Anyway, thanks everyone for entertaining this really juicy reflection. Woo! It's been good.
Yeah, probably it's time to wrap it up. It's almost an hour and a half here. It's about the time. So it's been a great discussion with everybody. I love everybody. Thank you so much for showing up and taking part in this. And it's been we'll be back next couple weeks. I should be here. So, yeah, until next time, edwarddodge.substack.com if you want to read the write-ups, and reach out to goddessbiblestudy@gmail.com if you want to join there. We have a signal chat group, and if anybody listening wants to join in, we're always looking for more folks. So thank you, everybody. Rosalie,
Thank you.
Lisa, Joshua.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, everybody.
Really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good
Okay,
night.
bye.
All right. Bye, guys.
Oh, how do I get off?